My name is Ursula Monroe. I am 67 years old, a widow, and I live alone in a modest apartment in Cleveland. For years, I've managed on my pension and the small savings I put aside after my husband passed. Life has been quiet, a little lonely at times, but I've always found comfort in routine. Watering my plants in the morning, walking to the corner store for groceries, and saving up for small surprises to bring my daughter, Ivy. She's my only child, my pride and heartbreak all in one. That morning, I set out with a clear purpose. Ivy had invited me to spend the weekend at her home, and I wanted to arrive with something sweet, something thoughtful. I stopped by a supermarket on the way, determined to buy a cake. Simple, but from the heart. It felt good to know that even on a tight budget, I could still give her a piece of home, a reminder of family. When I walked into the store, I adjusted the collar of my coat and touched the little pearl earrings on my ears. Cheap imitations, but precious to me. They had once belonged to my mother, or rather, they were the best I could afford to replace the real ones she wore. I carried her memory with me each time I fastened them, as if she were close enough to whisper courage in moments when I needed it. I picked out a small cake, white frosting with a few strawberries on top, nothing fancy. When I carried it to the counter, the cashier glanced down at the name printed on my card as I handed it over. His eyes flickered with recognition. He was an older man, perhaps in his 60s like me, with a weathered face and steady hands. He looked up at me, and in an instant something shifted in his expression. He reached out and held my hand, firm and deliberate, which startled me. His voice dropped low, barely audible above the hum of the store. "Ma'am," he whispered, "I shouldn't say this here." For a moment I froze, confused, unsure if I had misheard him. There was a gravity in his tone that sent a chill down my spine. He pressed the receipt into my hand and nodded slightly toward the back door of the store. I felt the blood drain from my face. What could he possibly know about me or about my family that needed to be hidden from strangers? I didn't dare ask him aloud. Instead, I slipped the cake back into my bag and quietly followed his wordless suggestion. My heart pounded in my chest as I pushed open the heavy metal door leading out into the alley. The air was sharp and cold, and the smell of damp cardboard boxes filled my nose. I moved quickly, searching for a place to collect myself. Behind a row of trash bins, I crouched low, clutching my coat tight. My breath clouded in the air as I tried to steady my hands. From that hidden corner, I could see the parking lot. The cashier's warning echoed in my ears, though he had said so little. It was the kind of moment that makes the world feel tilted, as though you've stepped into a story you didn't know you were part of. I pressed my back against the wall and waited, watching. Only minutes passed, though it felt like forever. And then I saw movement. A familiar figure appeared near a silver Lexus parked a few feet away. The man was Vernon Hale, my daughter's father-in-law. He looked around quickly, as if making sure no one noticed him. In his hands were glossy boutique bags, their gold lettering shining even in the gray light of the morning. He opened the trunk, slid them inside with practiced ease, and closed it with a satisfied click. I remembered the last time I had spoken with him. He had sat in my living room sighing about unpaid bills, prescriptions too expensive to fill, groceries too costly for their budget. He had painted a picture of hardship so vivid that I believed every word. Yet here he was in polished leather shoes and a tailored jacket, slipping away with luxuries most people could only dream of. The cashier's warning, the whispered urgency in his voice, it all began to take shape in my mind. Something was terribly wrong, and I had stumbled into the edges of it. My fingers tightened around the receipt he had given me. As I hid behind the trash bins, watching Vernon drive away, I realized that my visit to Ivy's family would not be the simple reunion I had imagined. This was no longer just a weekend with my daughter and her husband. Something darker was unfolding, something that involved money, deception, and perhaps more than I could yet grasp. I pulled my coat tighter around me, the fake pearls cold against my skin, and whispered to myself, Stay calm, Ursula. Just watch. Don't let them see you. Because sometimes the only way to learn the truth is to keep still, stay quiet, and let the lies reveal themselves in the open. And that was the moment when my quiet life shifted, when suspicion took root and refused to let go. Before we continue, let me just say this. If you've ever been blindsided by family or felt that uneasy tug in your gut telling you something wasn't right, then stay with me. What I discovered that day unraveled everything I thought I knew about my own blood. I promise, you'll want to hear how it all unfolds. My name is Ursula Monroe, and at 67, I've grown used to silence. Silence when I wake in the morning and no one stirs beside me. Silence in the evenings when the only sound is the faint hum of my refrigerator. After my husband passed a decade ago, I tried to fill the empty space with books, knitting, and the occasional phone call from my daughter. But nothing ever filled it completely. Living alone in a modest apartment in Cleveland means watching every penny, stretching my pension and the small savings I built over the years. It also means learning to carry loneliness like an old coat you cannot quite take off. I have developed rituals that keep me grounded. Each morning, I make a pot of weak coffee, the kind that lasts longer when you measure it carefully. I water the 3 houseplants I've managed to keep alive on the windowsill, whispering to them as though they are companions. Then I look in the mirror, fastening the pair of pearl earrings that hang from my lobes. They are not real pearls, though I wear them as though they were. My mother had once owned a genuine pair, glowing and luminous, but when she died and I could not afford such things, I bought these imitation pearls instead. They became my way of remembering her strength, a quiet inheritance that cost little yet meant everything. Most days are modest, and I do not complain. I know women who lost husbands and children, who ended up in nursing homes forgotten by their families. At least I still have my independence, and I still have my daughter Ivy. She is 35 now, with her own household and her husband Nathan. They live across town in a neighborhood that feels out of reach for me, with its tidy lawns and polished cars. We do not see each other as often as we used to, and I sometimes wonder when that distance began. But even when the phone calls are short and hurried, I remind myself that at least she is still there. At least she still answers. On that particular morning, after the unsettling encounter with the cashier, I returned to my apartment with the cake still in my bag and my nerves frayed. I placed the cake carefully in the refrigerator, though my hands trembled. To steady myself, I went about my usual chores. Sweeping the floor, folding laundry, checking the mailbox. There were only bills, as always. I sat at the small kitchen table and ran my fingers along the worn wood, remembering all the evenings my husband and I once sat there, laughing about little things. Now it was just me, sipping coffee and thinking about whether I could afford to replace the broken toaster. It is not the poverty that weighs heaviest, though money has always been tight. It is the feeling of being forgotten. I cut corners where I can, diluting the dish soap, patching the knees of old trousers, skipping my own medication some months so I can buy small gifts for Ivy. I tell myself it is worth it, because a mother should never show up empty-handed. Even when Ivy assures me she needs nothing, I want her to see I am still her mother, still able to give something. I pulled open the drawer where I keep envelopes of cash. It is not much, just a few crumpled bills and coins, savings from skipping out on things others take for granted. I counted them slowly, aware that once I spent them, it would take weeks to build up again. My fingers hesitated over the last few dollars, but I reminded myself, this is for Ivy. For her, it will always be worth it. Later, as the afternoon light slanted through the blinds, I allowed myself to drift back into memory. I could see my mother standing at the stove, her real pearl earrings glinting in the light, her face set with determination, even when food was scarce. She used to tell me that dignity was not measured by wealth, but by the way you carried, yourself when no one was watching. Those words stayed with me, and whenever I clasped my imitation pearls, I felt her beside me, whispering strength into my ear. I took out the cake once more, unwrapped it, and studied its simple decoration. Strawberries lined neatly on white frosting, not extravagant but bright enough to carry joy into a room. I imagined Ivy smiling when she saw it. I imagined Nathan thanking me, though he often seemed tired, his face worn by long hours at work. The thought comforted me. I set the cake back down, folded my coat neatly, and placed my handbag by the door so I would not forget it. My apartment felt smaller that day, walls closing in with secrets I did not yet understand. The cashier's whisper lingered in my mind, unsettled and sharp, but I pushed it aside. For now, I had to focus on the one thing that had always guided me: love for my daughter. As evening settled over Cleveland and the city lights flickered on, I made myself a bowl of soup from the last of the vegetables in the fridge. I ate slowly, savoring each bite as though it were more than it was. Afterward, I washed the bowl carefully, dried it, and set it back in its place. Every object in my home had its order, its rhythm, just as I did. When I finally lowered myself into the armchair by the window, the imitation pearls still at my ears, I felt the weight of both past and present pressing down on me. I thought of Ivy, of how much I wanted her to know that even in her absence, she remained the center of my world. I closed my eyes and told myself tomorrow would be brighter, that I would see her, that we would share the cake together. But deep inside, a faint unease had already begun to stir, whispering that the life I had built on sacrifice and quiet devotion was about to be tested in ways I could not yet imagine. And though I did not know it then, that day marked the beginning of revelations that would turn everything I believed about my daughter upside down. When Ivy first married Nathan 4 years ago, I thought my heart would finally rest easy. I remember standing in the church, watching my daughter walk down the aisle in her ivory gown, Nathan waiting with a nervous smile. He looked at her the way my husband once looked at me, as though she were the only person in the world. I cried that day, not just from pride but from relief, believing she had found a man who would protect her, who would build a home of stability and kindness. For a time, I held on to that belief as though it were a lifeline. But somewhere between that joyful day and now, the distance between Ivy and me began to stretch. At first, it was small things: missed phone calls, shorter visits, holidays spent with Nathan's family instead of with me. I told myself it was natural that children grow, start families of their own, and drift away. Yet beneath my reassurances, I felt something shifting in her tone, an impatience, as if my presence had become a burden she tolerated rather than a comfort she desired. Nathan remained polite, always respectful when he called to check in or stopped by to help fix something in my apartment. But even his warmth seemed carefully measured, as though he were caught between loyalty to Ivy and affection for me. He would glance at his watch, apologizing for having to hurry home, for Ivy needed him, or Vernon needed him. Always someone else seemed to come first. Vernon. The name alone stirred unease in me. Nathan's father had been part of the picture from the start, a man in his 60s with thinning gray hair and a voice that carried both charm and complaint. At family dinners, he often sighed heavily, speaking of medical bills and endless financial troubles. I remember one night when Ivy had just announced she was expecting their first child, though the pregnancy never came to term. Vernon leaned across the table and told me with practiced sorrow that he wasn't sure how they would manage to pay for his prescriptions. My heart tightened for him, and without thinking, I offered to help. It wasn't much, just a small contribution from my savings, but I handed it over, believing I was easing his burden. He thanked me profusely, calling me generous, insisting that someday he would repay me. I wanted to believe his gratitude was real. Yet only a few weeks later, I caught a glimpse of him stepping out of a tailor's shop in a brand new suit, his shoes polished, his tie perfectly knotted. I told myself there must be a mistake, that perhaps it was borrowed or bought on sale, but the doubt lingered. It gnawed at me quietly, though I swallowed it down and said nothing. Ivy defended him whenever I raised a cautious question. "Mom," she would say with that practiced tone, half irritated, half dismissive, "he deserves to look decent. He's had a rough life. Don't you think he should have one nice thing?" I would nod, silenced by her certainty, and wonder when she had become so skilled at deflecting truth with carefully chosen words. Over time, those conversations left marks I couldn't ignore. Ivy's voice carried less warmth, more calculation. I began to notice her stories didn't always match. One week she spoke of cutting corners and living paycheck to paycheck. The next, I noticed a new handbag slung over her shoulder, gleaming with the kind of leather no discount store carried. She always had an explanation ready: clearance, outlet, a friend's gift. Her words sounded reasonable, but my instincts told me otherwise. The rift widened gradually, like a crack in plaster that spreads with each change of season. I longed to bridge it, to bring her closer again, but every attempt felt one-sided. When I called, she was busy. When I visited, she seemed distracted. She spoke more of Nathan's obligations, of Vernon's needs, of how hard life had become for them all. Each time I offered to help, she reminded me that my contribution, though kind, was never enough. It left me feeling small, ashamed of my limited means, and desperate to prove my worth. I remember sitting one evening in my apartment, the hum of the radiator filling the silence, staring at the imitation pearls in my hand. I wondered if Ivy remembered how many sacrifices I had made to raise her, how many nights I skipped meals so she could eat, how many jobs I worked so she could go to school with her head held high. Did she forget, or did she simply no longer care? These questions kept me awake at night, echoing louder than the ticking clock on my wall. Nathan, though kinder, seemed blind to it all. He admired Ivy with unwavering devotion, convinced she could do no wrong. His loyalty might have been noble, but it left him vulnerable, unable to see the shadows creeping around him. He carried the weight of his father's complaints, his wife's requests, and the demands of a household that seemed to expand with each passing month. His shoulders sagged under the strain, yet he never once questioned it aloud. That was the state of our family. Outwardly intact, but beneath the surface, cracks were spreading. Love had turned into obligation, trust into doubt, and conversations into careful performances where truths were bent to fit the story Ivy wanted us all to believe. I held on to hope, clinging to the memory of the daughter I once knew, but deep inside, I could feel the foundation shifting, threatening to crumble. I told myself to be patient, to give her space, but patience was beginning to feel like surrender, and I was no longer certain what exactly I was surrendering to. I slipped out the supermarket's back door and let it settle behind me with a soft click. Cold air met my face, and I slid along the brick until a stack of crates hid me from the lot and held my breath until my chest ached. The cashier's words beat in my ears. I shouldn't say this here. I tucked the receipt into my coat and kept one hand on the wall to steady the tremor in my fingers. The parking lot stretched open, a shallow stage of winter sky and scratched asphalt. A silver Lexus glided into view and slipped neatly into the space beside the hedge. The engine idled with the self-satisfied sound of new machinery. The driver's door opened. Vernon Hale stepped out like a man who expects to be noticed. He wore a charcoal jacket that fit him clean at the shoulders, and the small gold pin at his collar winked. He looked left, right, not in fear, but habit, then lifted the trunk. Light fell over pale upholstery. In his hands were glossy boutique bags, thick paper, braided handles, embossed letters that caught the day. He set one down, then another, then reached into the back seat for a smaller bag with tissue peeking like white petals. Every movement was careful and practiced, the movements of a man who buys things he wants without asking permission. When he closed the trunk, the sound was low and cushioned, like a door in a house that keeps secrets. I could not breathe for a few seconds. I saw, again the night he sank into my couch with a long, weary sigh, listing groceries and prescription bottles and costs he named like enemies. I saw my own hands push an envelope across the table, small bills saved by skipping dinners I pretended not to want. He had held the envelope with both hands and called me generous. I had believed him. Now I watched the gold letters on those bags and felt a pressure rise behind my ribs. Vernon checked his reflection in the driver's window and adjusted his tie by a fraction. His shoes were narrow and newly shined. A private smile touched his mouth and left. He tapped the trunk once, the way men claim a thing, and stood a moment surveying the lot. A gull landed on the lip of the dumpster, cocked its head, and leapt away. A radio beyond the hedge offered a few bars, then went silent. Vernon's phone buzzed. He answered at once, his tone low and even. He gave a time, a place, and a patient, "I've got it," then slipped the phone into his jacket and glanced at the bags as though confirming a list. I thought of stepping out and saying his name. The picture of his face turning toward me, reading mine, stopped me cold. I am not made for scenes. I am made for making things stretch, for bringing a cake I can barely afford because love demands something in my hands. I pinched the plastic pearls at my ears until the sting pulled me back to stillness. A delivery truck eased backward toward the dock, beeping as it blocked my view. I slid into the sliver between crates and wall and kept the Lexus framed in a narrow wedge. Vernon opened the passenger door and set a leather folder on the seat, with the care most people reserve for fragile things. He checked his watch, the dark face sleek and spare. It belonged to a different life than the one he described in my living room. The truck pulled forward. Vernon closed the passenger door and listened, not for danger, but for schedule. He lifted his eyes to the thin sky, then down to the bags, as if weighing the day. Nothing in him said hardship. The difference between the man in my house and the man before me stood there like a third person. The longer I watched, the plainer it became. New car, luxury bags, unhurried grace. None of it belonged to a story of need. None of it matched the nights I spent choosing which bill could wait so I could bring a gift to my daughter. A life arranged like his did not need my envelope. A life arranged like his expected envelopes to arrive. I remembered how Ivy defended him whenever I asked careful questions. There was always a reason: clearance, outlet, a friend's discount. Looking at those bags, I knew no discount had brought them there. They were paid for in full and not by sacrifice. I lifted my phone, considered taking a picture, then lowered it. Proof demands the courage to face the argument that follows, and my courage, just then, was tuned to watching. It was enough to see clearly and to remember. Vernon circled to the drivers, sighed and slid behind the wheel. The signal clicked like a polite metronome. The Lexus joined the slow ribbon of cars and slipped past the hedge without hurry, as if the day were courteous to him by nature. The exhaust curled and faded. I stayed crouched by the crates until the cold reached my bones. Then I stood, brushed off my coat, and pressed the receipt deeper into my pocket, as if it were a thread I could follow. I had come out here with a simple plan: buy a cake, arrive with sweetness, enjoy an afternoon with my child. The plan had shifted under my feet. Something had stepped into its place and asked for attention. I would give it. I would follow quietly, firmly, until I reached the place where excuses fall away and only the facts remained. When I left the supermarket that day, I carried more than the cake in my bag. I carried the weight of what I had seen, the glossy bags and the polished Lexus that Vernon Hale had driven away in, the picture of a life completely at odds with the one he so often described. My steps were unsteady as I returned to the street, unsure whether to head straight to Ivy's house or to take a moment to clear my mind. The cold air bit at my cheeks, and for a moment I stood on the sidewalk, watching people come and go with their groceries, laughing with their children, going about their ordinary lives. Mine, I realized, had suddenly become anything but ordinary. I decided to walk for a little while before catching the bus to Ivy's neighborhood. The streets were familiar, lined with brick houses and small gardens already stripped bare by winter. As I passed a corner cafe, the smell of coffee drifted out, tempting but out of reach. I tightened my grip on my coat and kept walking, reminding myself that every dollar counted. Near the bus stop, two older women sat on a bench, their shopping bags resting at their feet. Their voices carried in the crisp air, the kind of conversation people have when they believe no one else is listening. I slowed my pace without meaning to, the sound of Ivy's name catching me mid-step. "Did you see her at the mall last week?" one woman asked, her tone both curious and sharp. "She had 3 bags from that boutique, the one where a single dress costs half my pension check." The other woman chuckled knowingly. "That girl always has something new. Last month it was a perfume bottle, the kind my granddaughter admires but could never afford. Chanel, I think it was. She walked out of the store as if it cost her nothing at all." I felt my breath catch in my throat. They were speaking of Ivy, my Ivy, the daughter who had called me just days before, sighing into the phone about how tight money was, how Nathan was stretched so thin, how Vernon's medical needs had drained them dry. I pressed my hand to my chest, steadying the thump of my heart as I kept my eyes forward, pretending not to listen while every word dug into me. "She told the cashier it was on sale," the first woman went on, "but even on sale, those dresses don't come cheap. You don't carry that many bags unless you're spending freely." The other woman leaned closer, lowering her voice, though I still caught every syllable. And the way she laughed, saying she always finds a deal, as though money just bends to her. I tell you, some people know how to put on a show. My steps slowed until I found myself standing just beyond the bench, my back to them, staring at the road. Their words wrapped around me like icy vines. I wanted to turn and ask them if they were certain, if perhaps they had mistaken her for someone else. But deep inside, I knew they hadn't. Their descriptions matched too well. The bags, the perfume, the practiced excuse of a sale. It was exactly what I had begun to notice in Ivy's own stories. The way she softened the sharp edges of truth with explanations designed to quiet suspicion. I felt the ache of betrayal sink deeper. It wasn't only Vernon who played this game. Ivy was part of it too. My daughter, who had once held my hand as a little girl and promised never to lie to me, now stood at the center of whispers about luxury shopping and careless spending. I closed my eyes, hearing her laugh in my memory, innocent and unguarded, and compared it to the tone these women described. Light, confident, practiced. A bus pulled up, its doors opening with a hiss, and the women gathered their bags, still talking. They boarded without ever knowing I had been listening, leaving me standing there on the sidewalk with my thoughts unraveling. I felt suddenly older than my years, heavy with the knowledge that my daughter lived a life of 2 faces, one for me, pleading poverty, and another for the world, clothed in perfume and silk. I finally boarded the next bus, sitting by the window as the city slid past in gray blur. My reflection stared back at me, the imitation pearls on my ears catching the weak light. I touched them again, as I often did when I needed to feel steadier. My mother's words came back to me about dignity being measured not in wealth, but in honesty. I wondered what she would say now, if she could see how her granddaughter had turned those lessons upside down. The bus jolted to a stop near Ivy's neighborhood. I stepped off, still hearing the echoes of gossip in my head. Gossip can be cruel, I told myself, but sometimes it carries truth no one else dares to speak. and what I had overheard did not feel like idle chatter. It felt like confirmation of what I had already begun to see with my own eyes. As I walked toward Ivy's street, the houses grew larger, their porches trimmed with holiday wreaths, their windows glowing warm against the winter dusk. Families gathered around dinner tables inside, laughter spilling out through the curtains. I imagined how Ivy's house would look, what I might find there, and whether the whispers of strangers had only scratched the surface of something far greater. I squared my shoulders and pulled my coat tighter. I had learned one lesson already: to pay attention, to watch, quietly and carefully, even when my heart ached to deny what I saw. The evening light was thinning into dusk by the time I reached Ivy's neighborhood. The street lamps had begun to flicker on, scattering weak circles of light over the sidewalks. I moved slowly, my steps heavier than they should have been, carrying not only the cake, but the weight of whispers and images I could not forget. Vernon's Lexus, the glossy bags, and those women at the bus stop who spoke of my daughter's shopping trips. Every detail wove itself into a pattern I could no longer dismiss. As I turned a corner, my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I pulled it out and saw Nathan's name glowing on the screen. For a moment, I considered letting it ring, but my finger betrayed me, sliding across the glass before I could stop myself. "Hello, Nathan," I said, forcing warmth into my voice. "Ursula," he answered, his tone gentle as always. "We were expecting you earlier. Ivy's been asking where you are. Are you close?" I swallowed hard, glancing at the street around me. I could not tell him the truth, not yet. I could not say that I had been hiding behind dumpsters and listening to strangers talk about my daughter as if she were someone I barely knew. "I'm on my way," I replied, steadying my voice. "Just taking a little time. The buses were running late." "Ah," he said, relief softening his words. "Ivy's cooking tonight. She didn't want you to worry about bringing anything, but she'll be glad to see you. Drive safe, or ride safe, I mean." He chuckled lightly, and the sound carried genuine kindness. I smiled despite myself. Nathan had always been that way, earnest, dependable, trying to keep everyone calm even when storms gathered. "I have something small," I admitted. "A cake. Nothing fancy, but I thought it might be nice." "That's thoughtful of you," he said quickly. "You didn't have to, but it'll mean a lot to Ivy." The mention of her name twisted something inside me. I pictured her laugh, the way she used to tilt her head and press it against my shoulder when she was a little girl. I also pictured the perfume bottle, the boutique bags, the casual stories she spun about bargains and discounts. "I'll be there soon," I said, cutting the conversation short before my voice could betray the battle inside me. As I slipped the phone back into my pocket, I noticed movement up ahead. Vernon stood near the curb, speaking with a young man who held a bucket and hose. It took me a moment to realize it was a car wash service, the kind that came directly to your house for a fee. Vernon reached into his wallet and handed over a stack of bills, more than I would spend on groceries in a week. The young man smiled, counting quickly, then set to work scrubbing the Lexus until the silver gleamed under the streetlight. I ducked, behind a tree, my pulse racing. The lie was no longer confined to whispers or distant observations. It was unfolding before my eyes. Vernon leaned against the car, whistling softly, his posture relaxed, his confidence unshaken. Money slipped from his hands as though it cost him nothing at all, as though there were no endless bills or crushing prescriptions he claimed to battle. I clutched the cake box tighter, my fingers denting the cardboard. I wanted to step forward to confront him then and there, but I held myself back. If I revealed what I knew too soon, they would twist it, explain it away, make me doubt my own eyes. I had to be careful. I had to see more. My phone buzzed again, another message from Nathan asking if I needed him to pick me up. I typed back quickly, my hands shaking. "No, thank you. I'm fine. Just a little delayed." I stared at the words before pressing send, the guilt washing over me. I hated lying to him. this man who had always treated me with respect, who had welcomed me into his life without hesitation. But I could not drag him into this, not until I had more than suspicion and fragments of evidence. The young man sprayed the Lexus, water glistening on its polished surface. Vernon handed him a tip, another bill folded neatly between his fingers. I felt my chest tighten, a heat rising in me that was equal parts anger and sorrow. How many times had I skipped meals, telling myself I wasn't hungry so that I could slide a few dollars into an envelope for Ivy? How many nights had I prayed for her happiness, only to discover she was living a life of indulgence under the guise of hardship? I turned away, pressing my forehead briefly against the cool bark of the tree. My breath fogged in the air, sharp and uneven. I whispered to myself that I had to stay calm, that I had to keep watching. The truth was, like a thread now, winding itself tighter around me. If I pulled it carefully, it would unravel the whole pattern. When the car wash ended and Vernon disappeared into the house, I straightened my coat and stepped back onto the sidewalk. The cake felt heavier in my hands, the pearls at my ears colder against my skin. I walked toward Ivy's door slowly, carrying not just a gift for her table, but a secret that threatened to shatter everything I thought I knew about my family. As I climbed the steps to her porch, I forced my shoulders back and lifted my chin. I had always been the mother who endured quietly, who gave without asking questions. But something was changing inside me. The doubts were no longer whispers. They were becoming undeniable. I rang the bell, and the sound echoed through the house. My heart pounded as I waited for the door to open, knowing that behind it were the people I loved most, and yet perhaps the people who had deceived me most deeply. The door swung open, and I was greeted by a rush of warm air that smelled faintly of cinnamon and roasted meat. Ivy's house stood tall and bright before me, its siding freshly painted a pale cream, the porch decorated with neat flower boxes even in the cold months. The garden, though bare for winter, had clearly been trimmed with care. The grass was short, the edges clean, and a new fence framed the yard. I stood there for a moment, cake in my hands, feeling the sting of disbelief work its way into me. Families who struggled to pay for prescriptions did not live in houses that looked like this. "Mom!" Ivy's voice broke through my thoughts. She stood in the hallway, smiling with that familiar charm that had disarmed me 100 times before. Her hair shone under the lights, styled with precision, and the cardigan draped over her shoulders looked like something I had only seen in glossy catalogs. She leaned in to kiss my cheek, the scent of expensive perfume brushing against me. "You made it!" Nathan was worried. I smiled faintly and stepped inside, letting the warmth of the house wrap around me. Nathan appeared from the living room, wiping his hands on a dish towel. His face lit up when he saw me. "Ursula," he said, genuine warmth in his tone. "We're glad you're here. Let me take that from you." He reached for the cake box, handling it as though it were something precious. "Thank you, Nathan," I murmured, my heart tugging at the sight of him. His kindness was steady, dependable, and yet I couldn't help but see the strain in his eyes. He was thinner than I remembered, shadows beneath his lids, the look of a man carrying burdens he couldn't quite name. As I handed him the cake, my gaze drifted past him into the house. The living room walls gleamed with a fresh coat of paint, a muted sage green that spoke of careful choices. The hardwood floors shone, newly polished, and the furniture was coordinated in warm, expensive tones. A large rug stretched across the center of the room, the kind sold in catalogs for hundreds of dollars. On the mantel sat a row of framed photographs, each in a gleaming silver frame, and I noticed a vase filled with fresh lilies on the coffee table. Lilies in December. Nathan noticed me looking and said lightly, "We've been trying to fix the place up. Ivy wanted it to feel more like home." His words held no boast, only simple pride, as though this comfort were the result of ordinary effort. I nodded, my throat tight, and forced a smile. "It's lovely," I said softly, though the word felt heavy in my mouth. Lovely was not the right word. Lovely did not capture the reality of new paint, new furniture, new flowers delivered fresh, when only days ago I had been told of overdue bills. Ivy took my coat, folding it neatly over her arm before hanging it in the closet. "Nathan's been working so hard," she said with a glance at him, her voice warm but almost rehearsed. "He insists we don't need much, but I thought we should make the place feel welcoming, you know? It was such a bargain, really. The furniture store had a clearance sale, and the rug was practically free." She laughed, her tone light, dismissing the weight of it all with practiced ease. I forced a small smile, but my chest tightened. I could still hear the women on the bench speaking of boutique dresses and perfume. Now I was standing inside a house that bore the same fingerprints of excess, cloaked in the same explanations of sales and bargains. Nathan placed the cake carefully on the kitchen counter, where the light revealed granite countertops, sleek and new. Stainless steel appliances gleamed back at me, and a large farmhouse sink sat beneath the window. Ivy followed him in, opening cabinets to retrieve plates. The dishes were white porcelain, edged in silver, and I remembered the chipped ceramic bowls I had used for decades. "Mom, sit," Ivy said, gesturing toward the dining table. "Dinner will be ready soon. We're just finishing up." I lowered myself into a chair, my hands folded tightly in my lap. From where I sat, I could see into the dining room. A crystal chandelier hung above the table, its facets catching the light in small sparks. The chairs were upholstered, matching the rug in color and pattern, and along the wall sat a sideboard adorned with more silver-framed photographs and candles in glass holders. Nathan set the plates with care, his movements calm, while Ivy poured wine into tall glasses. The label on the bottle was one I recognized from a cooking show, an expensive vintage from Napa Valley. She caught me looking and smiled. "Don't worry, Mom," she said easily. "This was on sale, too. You'd be surprised how much you can save if you know where to look." I nodded, my lips pressed together. The explanations flowed so easily, like water over smooth stones, and yet each one only deepened my doubt. The house, the furniture, the wine, all of it belonged to a life far from the struggle I had been led to believe. Nathan pulled out a chair across from me and sat down with a sigh. "It's good to have you here," he said, his eyes meeting mine. For a moment I saw the boyish hope in him, the quiet man who still wanted to believe his world was built on trust. I longed to reach across the table, to warn him of what I had seen, but the words clung stubbornly to my throat. If I spoke too soon, if I misstepped, I could lose the chance to uncover the truth fully. So I smiled, steadying my voice. "It's good to be here, Nathan." And as the light from the chandelier shimmered above us, I told myself to stay watchful. This house, this life, was telling me one story, but beneath it, I could feel another waiting to be revealed. I had barely settled into my chair when Ivy swept back into the room, carrying herself with a brightness that drew every eye. She had changed since the last time I saw her, though it had only been a few weeks. Her dress was fitted, the kind of fabric that shimmered under the chandelier, with a discreet tag still visible near the hem, as if she had only recently purchased it. Draped across her shoulder was a handbag I recognized from glossy advertisements, embossed with the Coach logo, its leather supple and untouched by wear. A light cloud of perfume followed her, sharp and floral, lingering in the air like an announcement of her presence. "Mom," she said warmly, tilting her head as though we had parted on the best of terms. She leaned down to kiss me again, her lips grazing my cheek. "I'm glad you came. I was worried you'd change your mind." I studied her face in the soft light. She was beautiful, yes, with the kind of beauty that grows sharper with age. But what unsettled me was the way her smile never fully reached her eyes. I had seen this expression before, on people who needed to charm their way through a conversation. Still, I forced a smile in return. "I wouldn't miss it, Ivy. You know I look forward to seeing you." She laughed lightly, brushing invisible dust from her sleeve. I hope you don't mind the dress. I found it on clearance. Can you believe it? Practically half off. Her words slid easily into the air, polished like a well-rehearsed line. She ran her hand over the Coach bag with casual affection. And this? Outlet store. Nathan thought it was silly, but it was too good a deal to pass up. Nathan, who had been pouring water into glasses, glanced up at her with a tired smile but said nothing. His silence told me he had heard these explanations many times before. I folded my hands tighter in my lap, trying to ignore the heat rising in my chest. "Ivy," I said softly, "you look different. Grown." It was the safest thing I could offer. "Different good, I hope," she replied with a playful tilt of her head. "You know, Mom, you should treat yourself sometimes. You work too hard, saving every dime. Life's too short." Her words struck me harder than she intended. Treat myself? I had given up new coats, better shoes, evenings out, and even medicine so that I could help her when she asked. I had lived on canned soup and instant coffee so that she could have a little more. And now she stood before me wrapped in perfume and silk, speaking of bargains as if they excused everything. Nathan set a glass in front of me, his hand brushing mine gently. "She means well," he whispered, as though reading the storm in my silence. His voice was tender, but it only made the ache in me deeper. Ivy walked to the mirror near the sideboard, adjusting her hair and checking her lipstick. "Vernon will be down soon," she said breezily. "He wanted to finish a call first. Poor thing, he's been under so much stress lately." She said it with such ease, as if her father-in-law were not the man I had just seen handing out cash on the sidewalk. I nodded slowly, my lips pressed together. "I'm sure," I murmured. She turned back to me, her eyes bright. "Anyway, I wanted tonight to feel special. You don't visit often enough, Mom. I wanted to make sure you see how well we're doing despite everything. Despite everything." The words rang in my ears. I forced myself to nod, though the dissonance between her statement and what I had observed that very day pressed heavier on my heart. As she settled across the table, her laughter filled the room, light and airy, drawing Nathan's gaze like a moth to flame. I watched him, the quiet admiration in his eyes, the trust that still lived there, and I felt a pang of sorrow for him. He believed every word she said, every story she spun, because love had blinded him to what stood in plain sight. I lowered my gaze to the glass of water before me, my reflection quivering in its surface. I wanted to reach across the table to pull her hand into mine, to beg her to speak the truth, but I knew if I pressed too soon, the moment would collapse, and I would be left with nothing but denial. So I remained still, listening to her stories of bargains and sales, letting them pile one upon another like bricks in a wall I would one day have to break. The chandelier sparkled above us, casting light over Ivy's dress, her bag, her painted nails. Everything about her shone, polished and perfect, but beneath the shine I felt the distance widening. The little girl who once tugged at my hand asking for bedtime stories was gone, replaced by a woman I could barely recognize. I took a breath, steadying myself. This evening had only begun, and already I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet. Dinner was announced with a brightness that filled the house, and Ivy led me into the dining room as though she were unveiling a stage. My eyes widened the moment I stepped inside. The table stretched nearly the length of the room, covered with a cream linen cloth that looked freshly pressed. At its center stood silver candlesticks and a large arrangement of roses, their petals full and fragrant despite the chill outside. Plates were set with precision, each rimmed with silver, and tall crystal glasses waited in neat rows. The food was what struck me hardest. Platters of steak, seared and glistening, rested alongside bowls of roasted vegetables. A tray of shrimp cocktail stood over crushed ice, its pink tails fanned like ornaments, and at the far end of the table I saw a bottle of Napa Valley wine breathing in a decanter. The air was thick with scents I had only ever encountered at weddings or banquets, not at a family dinner in a suburban home. Ivy beamed with satisfaction, sweeping her hand over the table. "It's nothing fancy," she said lightly, her voice carrying that same practiced ease I had heard when she spoke of bargains. "Just a few things I threw together. You know how to make a meal stretch if you try." I nodded, though my mouth had gone dry. I thought of my own suppers at home: simple soup, a piece of bread, sometimes an egg if I had one left for the week. To stand here now, surrounded by abundance, made me feel as though I had stepped into another world entirely, one I had been told did not exist. Nathan pulled out my chair with his usual courtesy, his eyes kind as he gestured for me to sit. He seemed proud, not boastful, only eager for me to feel included. His sincerity was so stark against the backdrop of indulgence that my chest ached. How could he not see it? How could he not question how this spread came from a family that so often spoke of hardship? As I lowered myself into the chair, I caught sight of Vernon at the head of the table. He had changed from his charcoal jacket into something even finer, a deep navy blazer, his shirt crisp and open at the collar. He lifted his glass with a calm authority, welcoming us with a smile that held no trace of struggle. His eyes met mine briefly, and I saw in them a flicker of recognition, as though he knew I had begun to notice. Ivy moved easily around the table, filling glasses with wine, her laughter carrying high above the clink of crystal. "We should celebrate," she said, her voice warm. "Life has been hard, yes, but nights like this remind us of what's worth holding on to." Her words rang in my ears, sweetened but hollow. I forced a smile as she poured, the perfume rising from her wrist as the ruby liquid filled my glass. I glanced at Nathan, who looked at her with admiration, his smile faint but genuine. He believed her, every word. He believed the wine was a rare treat, the shrimp an indulgence earned, the steak a gift. I lifted my fork and cut a piece of meat, the tenderness so different from the tougher cuts I bought for myself. Each bite felt heavy in my mouth, flavored not with garlic or rosemary, but with contradiction. I wanted to enjoy it, to accept the meal for what it was, yet every taste only sharpened the contrast between my life and theirs. The conversation drifted around me like music. Ivy spoke of decorating the house, of finding bargains on linens, of dreaming of a new chandelier for the entryway. Vernon chimed in with stories of neighbors who admired the garden, his voice deep and smooth, polished like the blazer he wore. Nathan listened quietly, nodding, occasionally laughing at Ivy's jokes, his devotion to her steady and unshaken. I sat among them, my hands folded between bites, and thought of the cake I had brought. It waited in the kitchen, small and humble, a gift born of sacrifice. It felt almost ridiculous now, placed beside shrimp and wine and silver candlesticks. And yet, in that cake was every penny I had saved, every choice I had made to give my daughter a gesture of love. Ivy leaned across the table, her eyes bright. "Mom, doesn't it feel good to sit together like this? Just family, just enjoying ourselves." "It does," I answered softly, though my chest tightened with the weight of all I could not say. The chandelier above us shimmered, casting prisms of light onto the polished table. I looked at Nathan again, at the way he gazed at Ivy with such trust, and sorrow tugged at me. He was blind to what unfolded. Before him, blind to the signs that screamed louder with every glass poured, every story told. I pressed my fingers against the imitation pearls at my ears, grounding myself. I told myself to watch, to listen, to remember, because the truth was not hidden anymore. It was sitting right in front of me, dressed in silk, drinking from crystal, laughing as though struggle were nothing more than a word to be used when convenient. I chewed slowly, each bite a reminder that the life I had been shown and the one I now saw were not the same. Something in me shifted as I sat at that table. It was the quiet realization that love alone could not blind me forever, that sooner or later I would have to choose between believing their words and trusting my own eyes. And for the first time in many years, I felt the weight of certainty settle in my bones. Dinner stretched on with polite laughter and clinking glasses, but my mind was elsewhere. Each word Ivy spoke, each glance Vernon cast down the table, pressed heavier against my chest. I smiled when spoken to, lifted my fork at the right times, but my heart beat in uneven rhythms, waiting for something I couldn't yet name. As Nathan reached across me to pour more water, my phone buzzed in my coat pocket, hanging on the back of the chair. I hesitated, glancing around the table. Everyone was distracted. Vernon raising his glass, Ivy laughing about a neighbor's compliment, Nathan leaning close to me. Quietly, I slipped the phone into my lap and tilted the screen. The message was from an unfamiliar number. My stomach tightened as I read the words. "It's Elias, from the market. I think you should see this." I froze, my fork suspended halfway to my mouth. Elias, the cashier, the man who had pressed my hand earlier, who whispered that strange warning. My thumb moved on its own, opening the image he had attached. The screen filled with a photo of a receipt. I leaned back in my chair, my breath caught in my throat. The numbers were clear, impossible to mistake. $420. The list stretched down the slip. Imported wine, premium seafood, cosmetics from a luxury brand, and more items I could not bring myself to read twice. Each one matched the very thing spread across the table before me. The wine and crystal, the shrimp cocktail, the perfume I had smelled on Ivy's wrist. My hand shook as I scrolled. A second photo appeared, this one of Ivy herself, smiling in the checkout line, her cart brimming with bags. Her hair gleamed beneath the fluorescent lights, her head tilted proudly, as though she belonged in that picture, as though none of it were out of place. A weight settled over me so heavy I could hardly lift my eyes. The meal, the laughter, the perfume, it was all there, captured in black and white numbers and frozen in a photograph. There was no excuse that could explain away what I held in my hands. "Mom!" Ivy's voice cut through, sudden and sharp. I snapped my head up, slipping the phone face down onto my lap. She was watching me, her brow lifted in mild curiosity. "Are you all right? You seem distracted." I forced a smile, swallowing hard. "Just tired," I murmured, my voice tight. Nathan reached over, concern flickering across his face. "We don't want to keep you too long. Maybe after dessert you should rest." His tone was gentle, filled with care, and it made my chest ache all the more. He believed in this family, believed in the stories Ivy and Vernon told, and now I held proof in my hands that his trust was being fed to lies. I pressed the phone closer into my lap, my thumb brushing the pearls at my ears. I had promised myself to watch, to stay silent until the right moment, but the urge to slam the receipt onto the table rose inside me like fire. I pictured the scene. Ivy's laughter faltering, Vernon's mask slipping, Nathan's eyes widening in betrayal. I almost did it. Almost. Instead, I drew a slow breath, steadying the storm inside me. Not yet. If I moved too quickly, I would lose the chance to see everything clearly. They would deny it, weave new stories, and I would be left again with nothing but doubt. I tucked the phone back into my coat pocket and lifted my fork, forcing myself to eat another bite as if nothing had changed. Ivy's laughter rang out again, her glass raised in a toast to family. Vernon nodded approvingly, the candlelight gleaming off his watch. Nathan clinked his glass against hers with a smile that broke my heart. None of them knew that, under the table, I carried evidence that could unravel it all. I ate quietly, each bite heavier than the last, the numbers on the receipt echoing in my mind. $420. It was more than I spent in a month. It was nights of soup and tea, mornings of skipped medicine, weeks of choosing between groceries and electricity, and here it was, gone in a single shopping trip. When the plates were cleared and Ivy disappeared into the kitchen for dessert, I let my hand slip into my pocket once more. My thumb hovered over the message, tempted to reply, but I stopped. I could not risk it now. The walls in this house felt too close, the ears too sharp. I would thank Elias later. For now, I would keep his message safe, like a lantern hidden under a cloak. Nathan returned with fresh plates, his smile still soft, his movement steady. He had no idea. None at all. And that ignorance, that trusting heart, cut me deeper than any of Ivy's lies. I straightened my shoulders, forcing myself to meet his eyes when he set a plate in front of me. "Thank you, Nathan," I said gently, and my voice cracked under the weight of all I could not tell him. He patted my hand lightly, mistaking my tremor for fatigue. "Your family," he said simply, "always." The words stung. I lifted my glass to my lips and drank deeply, telling myself that soon, very soon, I would need to decide how to use the truth I carried in my pocket. The evening ended later than I had expected. Dessert had been served, Ivy chattering about how she had perfected the recipe, Vernon leaning back in his chair with a glass of wine in hand, Nathan clearing plates with quiet diligence. I smiled when I needed to, offered polite words, but my mind was somewhere else entirely, still circling the images Elias had sent me, the receipt, the photo, the truth that glared at me from the glow of my phone. By the time Nathan offered to drive me home, I felt both drained and restless, desperate for air that wasn't heavy with perfume and deceit. We stepped outside together into the cool night. The house glowed warmly behind us, its windows spilling light onto the lawn. Nathan unlocked the car and opened the passenger door for me, always the gentleman. I thanked him softly and slid into the seat, the leather cool against my palms. He rounded to the driver's side, started the engine, and pulled out slowly onto the quiet street. For a few minutes, silence hung between us, filled only by the hum of the car and the faint crackle of the heater. I stared out the window at the neat houses passing by, each trimmed with wreaths and fairy lights, families gathered inside. I wondered if anyone else carried secrets behind such perfect facades. Finally, I turned to him, my voice low. "Nathan, can I ask you something?" He glanced at me, his eyes kind but tired. "Of course." I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "Do you ever worry that maybe things aren't exactly as they seem, with the house, the meals, everything?" He frowned slightly, keeping his eyes on the road. "What do you mean?" I folded my hands in my lap, my fingers tight together. "It just seems like a lot. A beautiful home, expensive food, and yet Ivy tells me there are struggles. Vernon says there are endless bills. It doesn't always match, Nathan." His jaw tightened for a moment, then he shook his head gently. "Ivy has a way of making things stretch. She's always looking for deals, finding sales no one else notices. She's smart that way." I wanted to show him the photo, the numbers on the receipt. I wanted to place the proof in his hands and watch his certainty crumble. But instead, I pressed my lips together, letting silence fill the space where my words should have been. He sighed, glancing at me again. "I know you worry, Ursula. I can see it in your face. But this is my family now. Ivy, my father, all of them. It's not always easy, but it's what I chose. I can't start questioning them every time something looks different than I expect. Families don't survive like that." His words cut me deeply because they came from love, not blindness. He wanted to believe in them, to protect the picture of unity he thought he had built. But I could see the exhaustion in him, the subtle wear in his shoulders, the way his eyes dulled when he spoke of responsibility. He was drowning quietly, and love had bound his hands. I reached over and touched his arm, gently. "You're a good man, Nathan." Better than most. I just don't want to see you hurt. He gave me a faint smile, weary but sincere. I appreciate that, really. But Ivy is my wife. Vernon is my father. Whatever they need, it's my job to provide. That's what being a husband and a son means. I turned back to the window, my throat tight. His devotion was admirable, but it was also the very chain that kept him captive. He could not see the difference between duty and manipulation, between love and exploitation, and I could not force him to see. Not yet. The car rolled through intersections, headlights sweeping across darkened storefronts. I thought of my own apartment waiting for me, small and quiet with its chipped dishes and worn rug. It wasn't much, but it was honest. It was real. Sitting beside Nathan, I realized how heavy a false life could become, how much it cost to pretend. He cleared his throat softly. Ivy told me you've been worrying about us. She said you ask questions sometimes. I want you to know I'm grateful, but you don't have to carry our burdens. You've done enough. My chest ached at his words. If only he knew. If only he could see that my questions weren't idle, that I carried not just worry but evidence. But I smiled faintly, letting him believe what he needed to. I just care about you both, I whispered. The rest of the ride passed in silence. When he pulled up in front of my building, he put the car in park and turned to me with that steady kindness in his eyes. Thank you for coming tonight. It means a lot to Ivy. And to you? I asked softly, searching his face. His smile deepened, though it didn't quite hide the weariness. Always to me. I squeezed his hand before slipping out of the car, the cool night air washing over me. As I walked up the steps to my building, I felt the weight of what I carried pressing harder against my ribs. I was alone in this, at least for now. Nathan's faith in Ivy was too strong, his love too unshakable. But the truth does not disappear just because someone refuses to see it. And I had promised myself that I would keep watching, quietly, until the moment came when the lies could no longer hold. The next morning, I woke early, though my body begged for more rest. The apartment was quiet, the kind of silence that amplifies every thought, every worry. I made coffee the way I always did, careful not to use too much, and sat at the kitchen table with the imitation pearls still in my ears. The images from the night before swirled through my mind, Vernon's calm posture at the head of the table, Ivy's perfume clouding the air, Nathan's tired devotion, and tucked away in my phone, Elias's message with that damning receipt. I knew I couldn't keep all of this inside much longer, but I also knew I needed more than a photograph, more than a list of numbers. If I wanted Nathan to believe me, if I wanted to protect him from the deception swirling around him, I needed evidence no one could dismiss. Later that afternoon, I bundled myself in my coat and decided to walk near Ivy's neighborhood again. It wasn't far, just 2 buses and a short stretch on foot. The closer I came to her street, the more unsettled I felt. The houses stood tall and polished, holiday wreaths shining on doors, driveways dusted with frost. Children played in yards, their laughter carrying into the cold air. It looked so ordinary, so wholesome, but I knew better now. As I reached the corner by Ivy's house, I slowed my pace. That was when I heard a voice call out, crisp and curious. "You must be Ivy's mother." I turned to see a woman in her 70s standing by her front gate. Her silver hair was pinned neatly, her coat buttoned against the chill. She had a face lined with years of conversation and the kind of sharp eyes that miss very little. "I'm Hermione Grant," she said, stepping closer. "We're neighbors. I've seen you once or twice, but never had the chance to introduce myself." I offered a polite smile, though my heart quickened. "Yes, I'm Ursula. It's nice to meet you." She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice as though sharing a confidence. "Ivy is quite the character, isn't she? Always coming and going, always something happening. We do try to keep up." Her tone carried both amusement and knowing. I nodded slowly, careful not to reveal too much. She keeps busy. Hermione's eyes sparkled. Busy indeed. Just last week, her father-in-law hosted a grand birthday celebration. Catered, mind you. A whole spread. Wine, music, even hired help. People said it must have cost at least $5,000, and that's just what we could see from over the fence. She chuckled lightly, shaking her head. It was quite the event. I felt the air catch in my throat. $5,000. I remembered Ivy's voice on the phone only days before, trembling with urgency as she told me about Vernon's prescriptions, how the costs were crushing them. I remembered her sighs, her carefully chosen words that painted a picture of need so dire I had nearly offered money again. And here was Hermione, describing a celebration of excess, a party fit for people who had no worries at all. "When was this?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. Hermione tapped her chin. "Let's see. Last Saturday. Yes, that was it. Quite the crowd, too. Cars lined the street. I thought perhaps you were there." I shook my head quickly, my grip tightening around my handbag. "No, I wasn't invited." Her brows lifted just slightly, the smallest flicker of sympathy in her expression. "Well, I suppose they keep their circle close, but it was something to behold. They do know how to put on a show." The world tilted slightly beneath me as her words sank in. Last Saturday, the same weekend Ivy had called me in tears about medical bills. The same day she had painted pictures of struggle. My stomach knotted, and I pressed my hand against it as though to hold myself steady. Hermione noticed my unease and reached out, her gloved hand brushing my arm lightly. "I didn't mean to upset you, dear. I only thought you might like to know. Families are complicated, aren't they?" I forced a small smile, though my voice trembled. "Yes, complicated." She patted my arm gently. "Well, if you ever want company, my door is always open. We neighbors have to look out for each other." I thanked her, managing to keep my voice steady, and walked slowly toward Ivy's house. Each step felt heavier, the weight of Hermione's words pressing down on me. The pieces were falling into place faster than I could process. Vernon's luxury bags, the banquet table, Elias's receipt, and now the revelation of a $5,000 party, all overlapping, all undeniable. When I reached the end of the street, I turned back for one last glance. Ivy's house stood pristine, its windows glowing warm against the fading light. To anyone passing by, it would look like a home filled with love and perseverance. But I knew better now. I knew the truth was layered under those fresh coats of paint and polished floors, a truth that would destroy Nathan if he ever saw it clearly. I clutched the imitation pearls at my ears, grounding myself as I walked away. My mother's words whispered back to me. Dignity is measured in honesty. I had lived my life by that belief, and now I would have to carry it into battle. For Nathan, for myself, and perhaps, though the thought broke my heart, even for Ivy. I had barely settled back into my apartment when the phone rang. The sound startled me, sharp against the quiet, and for a moment I just stared at it, my heart thudding. When I finally lifted the receiver, Ivy's voice rushed through, urgent and uneven. "Mom, I need you to put Nathan on the line. Do you know where he is? He's not answering my calls." I sat down slowly, clutching the cord. "He dropped me off not long ago. What's wrong?" Her breath came fast, the kind of rehearsed panic that made every word feel heavier than it should. "It's Dad. Vernon. He's in trouble. He needs surgery, an emergency procedure. The doctors said they can't wait and we're short on money. We need $300 right away." My stomach tightened. I remembered Hermione's words about the birthday party, the laughter and wine, the thousands of dollars spent in one night. I remembered the polished Lexus, the boutique bags, the crisp suits. Now Ivy's voice pleaded for money as though that entire display had never existed. "Ivy," I said carefully, "what kind of surgery is it?" There was a pause on the other end, too long, too measured. "It's for his heart. You know how fragile he's been. Please, Mom, don't ask so many questions. Just, can you help us? Can you send something until Nathan can cover the rest? I pressed, my palm to my forehead, closing my eyes. Images crashed through me. The receipt Elias had sent, the feast on the table, Hermione's account of the $5,000 celebration. Everything pointed to indulgence, not desperation. And yet here was my daughter, her voice quivering as though life itself depended on me believing her. I don't have that kind of money, Ivy, I whispered, though part of me wished I could. I can barely cover my bills. Her tone shifted instantly, sharper, cooler. Then tell Nathan. He'll know what to do. He always does. I stayed silent, the ache in my chest spreading. She was leaning on him again, as she always did, draining him one request at a time. He was loyal, too loyal, and she knew it. She knew exactly which strings to pull, and she pulled them without hesitation. I'll let him know you called, I finally said, my voice thin. She softened again, slipping back into the rhythm of daughterly affection. Thanks, Mom. You've always been there for us. I knew I could count on you. Then the line went dead, leaving me holding the receiver in a silence so heavy it felt like a stone. I sat there for a long while, staring at the patterns in the wallpaper. The lies were no longer subtle. They were bold, audacious, spoken without shame. I felt both sick and strangely awake, as though the fog had finally lifted and the truth stood naked before me. The next morning, I met Nathan for coffee near his office. He looked tired, his eyes shadowed, his tie slightly askew. Still, he greeted me with that same gentleness, pulling out a chair for me. Ivy called me last night, I said carefully as we sat. He sighed, rubbing his temples. Yes, she said Dad needed surgery. I transferred the money first thing this morning. It wasn't easy, but what choice do I have? He's family. I leaned forward, my hands clasped tightly around my cup. Nathan, please listen to me. Do you remember last Saturday when Ivy said Vernon couldn't pay for his medicine? That same day he threw a party, a big one. The neighbors told me. Catered food, wine, everything. It cost thousands. He froze, his eyes narrowing slightly. Who told you that? A neighbor, Hermione Grant. She lives right across the street. She saw everything. He shook his head slowly, almost sadly. Ursula, people talk. Neighbors love to exaggerate. And even if it's true, maybe someone else helped pay. You don't know the whole story. His refusal to see it pained me more than anger ever could. He wanted so badly to believe, to protect Ivy and Vernon, that he was willing to blind himself. I reached across the table, resting my hand over his. I only want you to be careful, I whispered. I don't want you to give and give until there's nothing left of you. He looked at me, his eyes soft but resolute. I appreciate that, I really do, but they're my family. If they ask, I can't say no. I pulled my hand back, slowly, the ache spreading deeper. He was trapped by love, bound by duty, and Ivy knew exactly how to use it. That night, alone again in my apartment, I sat by the window with the pearls still in my ears. Outside, the city lights flickered, cars passed, and somewhere a siren wailed. But inside, I felt only the echo of Ivy's voice on the phone, trembling with urgency, painting pictures of surgeries and bills, while perfume clung to her skin and wine filled her glass. I whispered to myself that the time for silence was ending. I had watched and listened long enough. The truth was gathering, piece by piece, and soon even Nathan would not be able to look away. The days that followed Ivy's frantic call pressed against me like a weight I could no longer carry. I moved through my apartment in silence, the imitation pearls brushing my neck as if reminding me of who I was, of the dignity my mother once taught me to protect. I had listened. I had watched. I had endured. But now the time had come to speak. I arranged to meet Nathan one evening after he finished work. The cafe where we sat was dim and quiet, the kind of place where voices soften themselves out of respect for the dark wood and muted lamps. He arrived looking as weary as ever, his tie loosened, his shoulders bent beneath burdens no one else seemed to notice. But when he saw me, he smiled with that familiar warmth that had always reminded me of the son I never had. "Ursula," he said, sliding into the seat across from me, "I hope you haven't been worrying. I know Ivy can sound dramatic on the phone." I folded my hands on the table, steadying myself. "Nathan, I need to show you something, and I need you to promise me you'll look at it carefully before you decide what to believe." His brow furrowed, but he nodded. "Of course." With trembling fingers, I reached into my handbag and pulled out my phone. I opened the message from Elias, the photos that had burned themselves into my mind since the night of that dinner. I slid the phone across the table toward Nathan. He leaned in, his eyes narrowing as he studied the receipt. I watched his lips move silently as he read the list: imported wine, seafood, luxury cosmetics. The total glared back at him in stark numbers. Then he swiped to the next image, the photograph of Ivy at the checkout line, her cart full, her smile bright. For a long moment, he said nothing. His hand gripped the phone so tightly, his knuckles whitened. Finally, he exhaled, the sound rough, as though the air had been trapped inside him for too long. "Where did you get this?" "The cashier," I said softly. "The one who warned me at the market. His name is Elias. He saw me, saw my name, and wanted me to know the truth. I didn't ask for it, Nathan, but it found me anyway." He shook his head slowly, still staring at the image. "Ivy said... She said it was a clearance sale. She said she found bargains, that she stretched every dollar." His voice cracked, the certainty unraveling in it. "But this doesn't look like bargains." My chest ached at the sight of him. The quiet man who had believed so fully, now holding evidence that stripped the belief away piece by piece. I reached across the table and touched his hand gently. "I didn't want to show you until I was sure. But Nathan, you're giving and giving while they're living like this. It's not right. You deserve to know." He finally lifted his eyes to mine, and for the first time, I saw the wall of trust beginning to break. There was no anger in his gaze, only shock, sorrow, and a dawning understanding that frightened him more than he wanted to admit. "Are you certain?" he whispered. I nodded firmly. I've seen Vernon with my own eyes, carrying boutique bags to his Lexus. I've heard neighbors speak of parties that cost thousands while Ivy called me begging for money. I've watched her laugh, draped in perfume and silk, while telling us they could barely get by. And now, here is the proof in numbers, in photographs. Nathan, I wouldn't bring this to you if I wasn't certain. He dropped his head into his hands, the phone resting on the table between us. His shoulders shook once, though he held back the sound. I thought she was just trying to keep things together. I never imagined she could... His voice broke and he stopped, unable to finish. I let the silence settle, giving him space to breathe, though every second felt like an eternity. Finally, he straightened, his face pale but resolute. I need to see more. I need to know for myself. If I confront her now, she'll have an answer ready. She always does. But if I can find something that leaves no room for excuses... His voice steadied, though sorrow lingered in it. Then I'll know what I have to do. I reached for my cup of coffee, though I barely tasted it as I sipped. You're right. Be careful, Nathan. But don't let this slip away. The longer it goes on, the more she'll take from you. He looked at me, his eyes glistening but determined. Thank you, Ursula. You've been the only one brave enough to show me what I didn't want to see. My throat tightened, and I pressed my hand against his for a moment. You're not alone in this. I'll stand with you. As we left the cafe, the night air hit my face, cool and sharp. Nathan walked beside me, silent, the phone heavy in his pocket. I knew the road ahead would break his heart before it could free him, but at least the first step had been taken. The truth was no longer hidden. It was in his hands now, undeniable, waiting for the moment it would change everything. A week passed after I handed Nathan the evidence, and though he went about his routine with steady resolve, I could sense the change in him. His voice over the phone carried less certainty. His eyes no longer lingered with the same admiration when Ivy spoke, and there was a weight in his shoulders that spoke of realization. He hadn't confronted her yet, and I understood why. He wanted something undeniable, something no clever explanation could erase. One evening, he called me in a low, steady voice. "Ursula, can you come over tomorrow afternoon? I might need you." The way he said it left no room for refusal. I agreed at once, my heart thudding with both dread and anticipation. When I arrived at Ivy's house the next day, Nathan met me at the door. His face was pale, but his jaw was set. "She went out shopping," he whispered, gesturing for me to come inside. "I need to show you something before she gets back." I followed him quietly into the house, the scent of expensive candles heavy in the air. He led me upstairs, his steps careful, his breathing shallow. We entered the bedroom Ivy and Nathan shared, and for the first time I saw it clearly. The upholstered headboard, silk bedding, the vanity table lined with cosmetics in glass jars, all arranged like a magazine photograph. Nathan crossed to the dresser, pulling open a drawer. "I was looking for a receipt earlier," he said quietly, "and I found this tucked under some scarves." He lifted out a notebook, its cover plain black, edges frayed, the kind of book one might use for budgeting or grocery lists. But the way he held it, as though it burned his hands, told me it was something more. He opened it to a page marked by a folded receipt and set it on the bed between us. My eyes scanned the lines scrawled in Ivy's handwriting, neat but hurried. Columns of numbers, dates, and names stared back at me. I leaned closer, my breath catching. It wasn't a budget. It was a record. There were notes of when Nathan's paycheck arrived, amounts allocated to Vernon, amounts kept for extras. The word extras was underlined twice. Beside it were lists of items: wine, handbags, cosmetics, dinner parties. Some were circled with little stars beside them, as if they were priorities. Nathan flipped to another page. "Look at this," he murmured. The list read, "Call mom for sympathy, ask for prescription money. If she resists, emphasize Nathan's stress." My stomach clenched so tightly I pressed my hand against it. Each page revealed more. Plans to approach me at specific times, notes about what excuses worked best, reminders to emphasize Vernon's health whenever doubt arose. There were even calculations about how much they could save if Nathan worked extra shifts, paired with what luxury items they could buy from that income. I felt the room tilt as I read, my vision blurring. She wrote all this?" My voice trembled, barely audible. Nathan nodded, his face drawn tight with pain. "There's no mistaking her handwriting. She's been planning it, Ursula. Every story, every request, it's all here. They've been keeping track like it's some kind of business." I sank onto the edge of the bed, my hands shaking as I held one corner of the notebook. The little girl I had once rocked to sleep, the child who once wept in my arms when she scraped her knee, had grown into someone who could write such words without remorse. My heart ached with a grief deeper than death. Nathan stood at the window, his shoulders hunched, staring out at the tidy street. "I didn't want to believe you," he admitted, his voice raw. "I defended her every time. But there's no excuse left, no bargain, no clearance sale. It's all written down like instructions." I rose and crossed to him, laying a trembling hand on his arm. "I never wanted to be right, Nathan. I prayed I was wrong, but now you see." He turned to me, his eyes wet but resolute. "I can't ignore it anymore. I won't. She's been using me, using you, and she's been using my father's name to justify it all. I need to confront her, and I need you there when I do. because if I face her alone, I don't know if I'll have the strength to hold steady. I nodded, though my chest felt hollow. I'll stand beside you, I whispered. Whatever comes next, you won't face it alone. Nathan closed the notebook carefully, sliding it back into the drawer as if to return the secret until the right moment. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway reached us then, and his face tightened. She's back, he said quietly. Tomorrow night. We'll gather everyone. Vernon, Ivy, the neighbors if we have to. It's time the truth comes into the light. As we left the room, I felt my legs tremble beneath me. The pearls at my ears seemed heavier than ever, as though my mother herself pressed them into me, reminding me to hold fast to dignity, even when it meant shattering the illusions of love. And as Ivy's voice floated up the stairs, calling Nathan's name with cheerful ease, I knew the storm we had been circling was about to break open for all to see. The following evening, the house felt charged with a tension I had never experienced within its walls before. Nathan had asked me to come early, and together we prepared the dining room. The long table, so often dressed with candles and fine china, was left bare except for a single notebook placed in the center. The sight of it, so plain against the polished wood, made my stomach tighten. It was the kind of object that could tear down an entire life with nothing more than its pages. When Ivy and Vernon walked in, they were smiling, full of the confidence of people who believed their world remained intact. Ivy wore a flowing blouse and gold earrings that caught the light, her perfume trailing behind her like a banner. Vernon carried himself with the same calm assurance, his blazer neatly pressed, his expression unreadable. "What's all this?" Ivy asked, her tone light as her eyes moved from Nathan to me, then down to the notebook on the table. "Why does it feel like a meeting instead of dinner?" Nathan stood tall, his hands planted on the back of a chair. I had never seen his face so firm. "Because it is a meeting," he said evenly. "We need to talk." Ivy's smile faltered, but only slightly. She exchanged a quick glance with Vernon, who raised a brow but said nothing. "Talk about what?" she asked. Nathan reached for the notebook and opened it to one of the pages filled with Ivy's handwriting. He pushed it toward her, his voice steady but sharp. "About this. About everything you've been planning, everything you've been taking from me, from Ursula, while pretending we were barely getting by." The color drained from Ivy's face before she forced a laugh. "Nathan, that's just a notebook. Scribbles, ideas. You know how I am. I write things down when I'm stressed." But Nathan didn't laugh. He leaned closer, his finger tapping the page. "Ideas? This one says, call Mom for sympathy. Emphasize Dad's health. This one lists how much money to ask for after each paycheck. And this one..." He flipped the pages with force. "This one calculates exactly how much you could spend on handbags if I took on overtime shifts. Tell me, Ivy, are those just ideas?" The room went quiet except for the sound of her unsteady breathing. Vernon finally spoke, his tone calm, almost dismissive. "It's strategy, Nathan. Every family needs to plan. You provide, they allocate. It's nothing more than keeping the household running." I stepped forward then, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. "Keeping the household running? Parties that cost thousands? Shopping trips for perfumes and handbags? Do you call that survival, Vernon? Or is it something else entirely?" Hermione Grant, who Nathan had invited as a witness, cleared her throat from her seat near the corner. "I saw the party," she said firmly. "I saw the caterers, the wine, the guests. I've lived on this street for 20 years, and I've never seen extravagance like that. Don't you dare call it survival." Gasps echoed softly among the few other neighbors Nathan had asked to join, their eyes wide, their whispers filling the edges of the room. Ivy's face reddened as she realized the audience was larger than she had anticipated. "Mom," she said sharply, turning on me, "how could you bring outsiders into this? Our family's business isn't theirs to see." I met her gaze without flinching. You made it theirs when you used my name to beg for sympathy while parading luxury in front of them. You turned my love into your excuse, and now the truth belongs to everyone." Her lips trembled, but Vernon cut in, his voice low and cold. "Enough. You should be grateful, Ursula. Nathan's success supports us all, and that's what families are for. We play our parts. Yours is to be quiet and trust the choices being made." Nathan slammed his hand down on the notebook, the sound echoing through the room. "No," he said, his voice shaking with fury I had never heard from him before. "My part is not to be a bank. My part is not to be lied to, manipulated, drained dry while you live like royalty. My part is to protect the people I love. And right now, the only person in this room who has protected me is Ursula." The silence that followed was suffocating. Ivy's face crumpled, but not with remorse, with fear at being unmasked. She stammered, searching for words, but none came. Vernon straightened his jacket, his eyes narrowing, but even his composure was slipping under the weight of so many eyes watching. Hermione's voice cut through again, crisp and decisive. "We've all seen enough. The truth is plain. You've taken advantage of kindness, and kindness has its limits." I felt my chest rise and fall with the release of years of silence. For once the lies had no place to hide. For once the dignity I had carried quietly had found its voice, and the room itself bore witness. I looked at Nathan, his face pale but resolute, and I saw in his eyes the final fracture of trust. The deception that had bound him was breaking apart, and though it hurt, it was also the beginning of something new. Ivy dropped into a chair, her head in her hands, while Vernon stood stiff, silent at last. The neighbors whispered among themselves, shaking their heads, their disappointment heavy in the air. And I, standing with the pearls cool against my skin, felt a steadiness fill me. The lies had been dragged into the light, and no amount of excuses would ever cover them again. The house had fallen into a silence so heavy it seemed to press against the walls. Ivy sat hunched at the table, her gold earrings catching the light, but her face pale, almost as if the shine had drained from her entirely. Vernon stood behind her, jaw tight, his eyes hard as stone. Nathan remained upright, the notebook still before him, his hand resting firmly on it as though it were the anchor keeping him steady. The neighbors lingered at the edges of the room, whispering softly among themselves, their shock still settling. I thought that would be the end, that the lies had been exposed, the show dismantled. But Nathan wasn't finished. His eyes burned with a quiet fire as he opened the notebook again, flipping through its pages with deliberate care. He stopped suddenly, his face tightening, his breath catching. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice sharper than before. He turned the book toward Ivy, jabbing his finger against a line of writing. "Who is Daniel?" My heart lurched as I leaned closer. The words were written in Ivy's hand. Gift for Daniel. Watch, cufflinks, hotel dinner. The date scrawled beside it was recent, only weeks old. Ivy's head shot up, her eyes wide. That's nothing," she stammered. "Just a friend of Vernon's. Business, that's all." But Nathan's face had gone rigid, his voice low and trembling. "A hotel dinner, cufflinks, a watch." His hands clenched around the edges of the notebook. "You've been using my money, our money, to buy gifts for another man." Ivy shook her head furiously, her earrings swinging. "It's not like that, you're twisting it. Daniel is just—" She faltered, her eyes darting toward Vernon as though begging for rescue. But Vernon stayed silent, his mouth a thin line, his eyes avoiding hers. He would not shield her now. Nathan's breath came harsh and uneven. "All this time, I thought you were stretching dollars, sacrificing for this family. I worked nights, skipped meals, gave everything I had because I believed you. And here I see you showering another man with gifts, treating him while you drained me dry." The neighbors gasped softly, their whispers rising again. Hermione's voice cut through, sharp and certain. I've seen her car parked outside the Hilton on more than one occasion. I didn't want to say anything, but now it all makes sense. Ivy's face crumpled, her hands trembling against the table. It wasn't what you think, she pleaded, her voice cracking. Daniel helped with things Vernon couldn't. He was kind. He understood me. Nathan's eyes darkened with a pain so deep I could feel it reverberate through me. He closed the notebook with a hard snap, his hands shaking. Ivy, you didn't just betray me with lies about money. You betrayed me with your heart, your loyalty. You let me carry everything while you gave yourself away to someone else. I reached across the table, touching Nathan's arm gently. His skin was taut beneath my fingers, his body trembling with rage and grief. I wanted to take the pain from him, to shield him the way I had when he first married Ivy, but this was a wound only truth could carve, and only truth could heal. Ivy broke into tears then, loud, desperate sobs that filled the room. I never wanted to hurt you, she cried. I just needed more than what we had. You were always tired, always working. Daniel made me feel alive again. Her confession struck like a blade. Nathan recoiled as if her words had slapped him. Alive? He repeated, his voice raw. While I worked myself into the ground to keep this house standing, to keep food on the table, to pay for your father's supposed needs, you sought life in another man while draining mine from me? Vernon finally stepped forward, his voice sharp with annoyance. That's enough. This isn't helping anyone. Mistakes were made, yes, but families survive worse. Nathan, you're overreacting. Men have forgiven more than this. Nathan turned on him, his eyes blazing. You don't get to decide what I forgive. You've manipulated me for years, bled me dry with your endless stories of hardship while living in comfort. And now I see where it all led. To deceit so deep, it's poisoned every corner of this house. The room pulsed with the weight of his words. Ivy sobbed harder, her hands covering her face, but the neighbors no longer looked at her with sympathy. Their eyes were filled with disdain, disappointment, even disgust. I sat back, my heart heavy but unshaken. The truth was fully uncovered now, laid bare before the very community Ivy had hoped to impress. There was no way to spin it, no bargain or excuse left to offer. Nathan stood taller than I had ever seen him, his grief etched deep, but alongside it, a clarity that had been missing for far too long. Pack your things, Ivy, he said finally, his voice low but steady. I'm done. Whatever we had is gone. You can't buy it back with excuses. Not this time. She dropped her hands from her face, staring at him as though she hadn't heard him correctly. But when his gaze did not soften, her sobs turned to desperate pleas. Nathan, please, think of everything we've built. Think of Dad. Think of appearances. Nathan shook his head. Appearances are all you ever cared about, and they're the very thing that destroyed us. The neighbors rose then, murmuring among themselves as they made their way toward the door. Hermione lingered, her eyes meeting mine. She gave a small nod, one of solidarity, before slipping out. Ivy remained at the table, broken and desperate, Vernon stiff and silent beside her. Nathan closed the notebook and tucked it under his arm. Then he turned to me, his voice soft, trembling with exhaustion. Thank you for standing with me, Ursula. I don't know how I'll rebuild, but at least I'm no longer blind. I squeezed his hand gently, the imitation pearls at my ears cool against my skin. You'll rebuild, Nathan, and this time it will be on honesty. As we stepped out into the night, leaving the house heavy with silence, I knew the final fracture had come. Ivy's deceit was no longer just about money. It had cut into the deepest part of loyalty, leaving nothing behind but the truth neither of us could ignore. The morning after the confrontation, the world felt strangely quiet. I sat by my window with a cup of coffee, watching the city stir awake, yet inside me everything was still. The night's events replayed in my mind, the notebook, Ivy's sobs, Vernon's cold defiance, and Nathan's voice breaking as he told her to pack her things. It felt less like a memory and more like a wound that had only just stopped bleeding. Nathan came to see me later that day. He looked exhausted, his eyes ringed with shadows, but there was also a clarity in him that hadn't been there before. He carried a small duffel bag, and when I opened the door, he stepped inside without a word, setting it down by the couch. "She's gone," he said quietly. "I asked her to leave last night. Vernon left with her. I don't know where they went, and right now, I don't care." I motioned for him to sit, and he sank into the armchair across from me, his body heavy with the weight of finality. "Was it difficult?" I asked softly. His lips pressed together in a thin line. "It was the hardest thing I've ever done. For years, I defended her, convinced myself that every excuse was truth. I wanted so badly to believe in the woman I married, but after last night, there was nothing left to believe in." He ran a hand over his face, sighing deeply. "Do you know what hurts the most? Not the money, not even the affair. It's realizing how blind I let myself be." I reached across the table and touched his hand gently. "That's not weakness, Nathan. It's love. Love makes us believe in people even when they don't deserve it. You gave her every chance, and that says more about your character than hers." His eyes filled, though no tears fell. He nodded, gripping my hand tightly. "Thank you for standing with me. Without you, I might still be lost in her lies." The days that followed were heavy with change. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. Hermione came by one afternoon with a basket of bread, her eyes filled with sympathy. "People talk," she said, "but this time they're not gossiping. They're taking your side. They saw the truth, and they won't forget it." For Ivy and Vernon, the fallout was swift. The same neighbors who once admired their polished appearances now crossed the street to avoid them. Invitations vanished, whispers followed wherever they went. The shine of their carefully built image cracked beyond repair, leaving only the hollow shell beneath. Nathan filed for divorce quietly, without spectacle, though I could see the toll it took on him. Signing those papers meant closing the door on years of his life, years he had given freely. He moved into a small apartment not far from mine, the duffel bag by his side, the notebook locked away in a drawer. We shared dinners often in those weeks, simple meals at my table, soup, bread, sometimes just tea and biscuits. He told me about the long hours at work, the strain of starting over, and I listened, offering the comfort I could. There were moments when he broke down, when the weight of betrayal pressed too heavily, and I would place my hand on his shoulder, reminding him he was not alone. As for me, I carried my own ache. Ivy no longer called, no longer reached for me, even in pretense. The silence from her was sharp, like glass under the skin. I grieved for the daughter I had raised, for the love that had been twisted into deceit, but even in my grief, I felt something else. Relief. The lies no longer bound me. I had faced them, spoken them aloud, and though the cost was high, the truth had freed us both. One evening, Nathan and I sat by the window of my apartment, watching the lights flicker across the city. He turned to me, his voice quiet. "Do you ever regret it? Exposing them, I mean. Do you ever wish we had stayed silent just to keep the peace?" I shook my head slowly. Peace built on lies isn't peace at all. It's only waiting for the moment everything crumbles. Better to face the storm and stand in the truth than to live under a roof that could fall at any time. He leaned back, letting out a long breath. "You're stronger than I am." "No," I corrected softly. "You're stronger than you realize. You chose to see. That takes more courage than most people will ever have." In the weeks that followed, I watched Nathan begin to heal. The lines of exhaustion slowly softened, replaced by a steadiness that came from facing pain head on. He no longer carried himself like a man bent beneath invisible chains. He walked straighter, his gaze clearer, his laughter, when it finally returned, honest and unburdened. For me, life remained modest in my small apartment. The imitation pearls still hung from my ears each morning, a reminder of dignity and truth. But now, when I touched them, I felt not only my mother's strength, but also the knowledge that I had protected someone I loved, that I had chosen honesty over silence. The consequences had been severe, yes. A daughter lost to her own choices, a family fractured beyond repair, but what remained was cleaner, purer, a bond forged not in illusion, but in truth. The weeks after Ivy left settled into a rhythm that felt unfamiliar, yet strangely peaceful. Nathan stopped by my apartment often, sometimes with groceries in hand, other times with nothing but the weariness in his eyes. I welcomed him with open arms, making space at my small kitchen table that had seen more tears than celebrations in recent years. We would eat together, the meals simple, but warm, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the quiet comfort of companionship without the weight of lies pressing in. One evening, as the winter wind howled against the windows, Nathan arrived looking heavier than usual. He sat down without a word, pressing his palms together as though gathering the courage to speak. Finally, he lifted his head, his voice unsteady. "Ursula, I need to tell you something. I've been thinking about all the times you gave when you had so little. Ivy told me once that you even cut your prescriptions so you could help with Vernon's bills. Was that true?" The question pierced me, but I didn't deny it. I nodded slowly. Yes. I thought it would ease their burden. I thought I was helping my daughter, helping you. It was a sacrifice I was willing to make. Nathan's eyes filled, and before I could say more, he broke. The man who had carried himself with such steady dignity now buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. His sobs were low, rough, the sound of a heart splitting open. "You gave up your health for us," he said through tears, "and all the while we were being drained by lies. I should have seen it. I should have protected you." I moved to his side, wrapping my arms around him, pulling him close as though he were my own son. "You protected me in ways you don't even realize," I whispered. "You gave me purpose when loneliness could have swallowed me whole. You let me love you, Nathan, and that was enough." But he shook, his head fiercely. "No, it wasn't enough. You deserve more. You deserve better than to wear yourself down while others used your kindness." He pulled back then, his eyes red, and reached into his pocket. From a small velvet box, he lifted something that caught the dim light, a pair of pearl earrings, luminous and smooth, their luster undeniable. My breath caught as he held them out to me. "I bought these for you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not as payment, not as charity, as a promise. You've worn those imitation pearls for so long, carrying your mother's memory and your dignity with them. But you deserve the real thing. You deserve to wear something that reflects who you are, strong, pure, unshaken." My hands trembled as I took the earrings, the weight of them warm in my palm. For years, I had worn my mother's simple imitation pearls, a reminder that truth and love mattered more than appearances. Now Nathan was offering me the real version, not to erase the past, but to honor it. Tears blurred my vision as I placed them against my ears, replacing the old with the new. The pearls were cool against my skin, heavier than I expected, yet they felt right, as though they had been waiting for this moment. Nathan looked at me, his expression softening. "They suit you," he said gently. "When I see you in them, I'm reminded of what family is supposed to be. Honest, loyal, real." I touched the earrings lightly, my heart swelling. "These don't erase the pain, Nathan. They don't bring back what was lost." "I know," he said quietly, "but maybe they can mark the beginning of something better, a new chapter. For both of us. The room was silent except for the wind outside and the steady beat of our breaths. In that moment, I felt something shift inside me. The grief of losing Ivy would never disappear completely, but the pearls reminded me that healing could come in small, radiant forms. It wasn't about replacing the past, it was about carrying its lessons forward with dignity. Later that evening, Elias Ward stopped by unexpectedly with a basket of fruit, his familiar kind smile brightening the room. Hermione followed not long after, her chatter filling the quiet corners of the apartment. They stayed for tea, and together we laughed, the sound light and unburdened. I looked around the table at Nathan, Elias, and Hermione, and realized that even in the ashes of betrayal, new bonds could form, bonds rooted in honesty and respect. When the night ended and the door closed behind them, I touched the pearls once more, feeling the gentle weight of them against my skin. My mother's words echoed back. Dignity is measured in honesty. For years, I had lived by that truth. Now, at last, I felt it reflected back to me, not only in the jewelry I wore, but in the life I was beginning to rebuild. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to believe in hope. Not the fragile hope that depended on others' lies, but the steady hope born from truth, from resilience, from the quiet strength that comes when you choose to endure with grace. Spring arrived quietly, softening the sharp edges of winter, and with it came a sense of renewal that I had not expected to feel again. The air carried the scent of blooming lilacs, and the sunlight lingered longer in the evenings, as though the world itself was offering a second chance. Nathan had been living in his modest apartment for a few months, and though the shadow of betrayal still touched him, there was light in his eyes that grew brighter with each passing week. One afternoon he called and asked if I could join him for dinner. His voice held a note of anticipation, almost boyish, that I hadn't heard in years. I agreed, curiosity stirring in me. When I arrived, I found the apartment transformed. The table was set with care, a vase of fresh tulips in the center, their stems angled as if they had been arranged with deliberate thought. The air smelled of roasted chicken and herbs, the kind of meal made with time and tenderness. "Mom," Nathan said warmly, using the name he had adopted for me with ease, "there's someone I want you to meet." A woman stepped from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She was in her 30s, with kind eyes and a gentle smile that reached them fully. Her presence carried none of Ivy's practiced charm, none of the sharpness I had grown used to. Instead, she exuded calm, a quiet strength that reminded me of the earth itself, steady, nurturing, real. "This is Lydia," Nathan said, his voice tinged with pride. "We've been seeing each other for a little while now." Lydia offered her hand, and when I took it, I felt warmth that was immediate and genuine. "It's an honor to finally meet you," she said softly. "Nathan speaks of you often. He says you're the one who kept him standing when everything else fell apart." Her words touched me deeply, and I found myself smiling without effort. "I only did what any mother would," I replied, though I knew in my heart it was more than that. Dinner unfolded with ease. Lydia moved with quiet confidence, passing dishes, laughing gently at Nathan's small jokes, listening intently when I spoke. She asked questions about my life, my memories, as though she truly wanted to know me. There was no performance, no veil, just sincerity. As I watched her and Nathan together, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, hope for his future. After dinner, as we cleared the table together, Nathan placed a hand on Lydia's shoulder, his expression tender. "She makes me feel safe," he said, almost shyly, as though confessing something precious. I didn't think I'd ever find that again. I touched his arm gently. "You deserve it, Nathan. You deserve someone who sees you for who you are, not for what you can provide." Lydia smiled softly, her eyes shining. "I see a man who gives more than he ever takes." That's rare, and I won't take it for granted. The evening passed with laughter and simple joy, and when I finally returned to my apartment, I carried with me a warmth that lingered long after the door closed behind me. For the first time, I believed Nathan's life could truly begin anew, untethered from the chains of deception. Weeks later, he invited me again, this time to a small gathering. When I arrived, I found the apartment filled with the sound of voices and laughter. Lydia's family was there, kind and welcoming, and among them, Nathan seemed lighter than I had ever seen him. He stood tall, his arm around Lydia, his smile unburdened. At one point, I slipped into the kitchen to catch my breath, and Lydia joined me, handing me a glass of lemonade. "I know Nathan has carried a lot," she said gently, "but he told me something last night, that he wouldn't have survived it without you. I want you to know I'm grateful. Whatever life we build together, you'll always be part of it." Her words nearly brought tears to my eyes. I touched the pearls at my ears, the ones Nathan had given me, and felt their cool weight anchor me in that moment. They were more than jewelry. They were a symbol of survival, of dignity, of love reclaimed from betrayal. As the evening wound down, Nathan gathered us all in the living room. He looked around, his expression full of quiet pride, and then he met my eyes. "I never thought I'd have this again," he said softly. "A home filled with love, laughter, and honesty. It feels like a second chance I didn't think I deserved." I smiled through tears, my heart swelling with gratitude. "It's never too late, Nathan. Life has a way of offering new beginnings when we least expect them." Later, as I left their apartment, I paused at the doorway. From the kitchen, I could hear the sound of Lydia's laughter mingling with Nathan's, the clatter of dishes, the rhythm of an ordinary, honest life. It was the sweetest sound I had heard in years, and it wrapped around me like a blessing. Walking home under the soft glow of streetlights, I touched the pearls once more and whispered a silent prayer of thanks. My journey had been marked by betrayal and loss, but it had also led me here, to healing, to hope, to the joy of watching someone I loved step into the light of a new life. And in that quiet moment, I knew that happiness, though delayed, had finally found its way back to us.